This is Jones & Co. Now, Alan Jones and Peter Credlin.
Yes, but still with everything going for her. Get Up, the Greens, the union movement tipping in money. And just to explain to people across Australia who are watching us why this is a very difficult seat is that it is on one margin of the electorate ocean. So that when redistributions occur and you have to add to the size of the electorate, there's only one way for that electorate to extend, and that is to the west. And as this seat goes to the west, it comes into Kingsford Smith, which is heavily Labor, and it comes into Tanya Plibersek's seat of Sydney, which is heavily Labor. So the seat's going to get more and more difficult for the Liberal Party to win. But that apart, the argument that the people of Wentworth were protesting that Malcolm Turnbull had been sacked as Prime Minister is a nonsense, because in the postal voting and the pre-polling, the Liberal candidate did very well. That was before Turnbull and his son started the guerrilla tactics.
And also that was the closest, those votes were taken the closest time to the dumping of Turnbull. So you would expect that the anger, if there was any anger about the removal of Malcolm Turnbull, would have been most potent with the pre-polls and the postals. In fact, they were much stronger for the Liberal Party then than they were after the guerrilla campaign, as you called it rightly, from Alex Turnbull and Malcolm's campaign of silence that went right to the wire on polling day. That's when they fell away. So the more they saw that Malcolm was not supporting the team, the more they said, you know what, we're not in for this just yet.
Well, they didn't turn up. They didn't turn up. I mean, there's fewer than 80,000 people so far voted. The electorate has 103,000 on the roll. They aren't accounted for. The informal vote has gone up tonight. It's heading towards 7%. So people were tired of the Turnbull thing, but this is an electorate where these fashionable issues. So Karen Phelps said, oh, well, global warming. Climate change is the big issue. Well, Karen, if I were Scott Morrison, I would today say, well, we've heard Dr Phelps looks like being the member, so we'll now be calling for tenders for 25 wind turbines to go up on Bondi Beach and down Old South Head Road. What about that?
I would so love to see it. You know, how quick would Wentworth... They'd do a public campaign. They'd
hang on, that's what they wanted.
Billboards, they'd be all... Oh, yeah, NIMBYs out.
That's what they wanted. Absolutely. And then, of course, now hang on. And Karen says, we've got to get people off Manus Island out of Nauru. So, put your hand up if you're in the seat of Wentworth, a few spare bedrooms. We can easily accommodate them. No rent, no whatever, bring them in. Or are these just sort of making you feel good policies which really say this purges our wealth and we'll vote for all this sort of stuff? I mean, it is an absolute nonsense. But I'm simply saying, with everything going for her, Dr Phelps, she got 29% of the vote. The loser got 43%. Now, enter someone like Laundy, Craig Laundy. Now, when sycophancy clashes with reality, you get irrelevance, don't you? And the bloke's irrelevant. Though he got a gig on this station on Saturday night.
Well, and I was going to say he preached to everyone about loyalty. Of course, he's one of the most disloyal characters I've ever met in politics. In fact, I've got a grab I wanted to play for our viewers. This is him, Craig Laundy, on loyalty on Saturday night.
If we do lose this seat tonight, I think one of the interesting things we're going to see is how quickly those that were responsible try to turn it to it's Malcolm's fault, not what we did. I obviously argued all the way through for stability and loyalty and came up short.
OK, this is the bloke who, within a nanosecond of arriving in politics in his very first term, having been aided and supported by then Prime Minister Tony Abbott, joined the Queanbeyan Five, regularly met out at Peter Hendy's house in Queanbeyan, plotted and schemed against a sitting Prime Minister. I mean, it beggars belief. And in the last election in 2016, when he was running for the seat of Reid, he was out there buying a house, a multi-million-dollar mansion, outside the electorate, but keeping it all quiet. I mean, this guy has no shame.
None.
No shame.
None. And then the other bloke, Turnbull, talking about loyalty. And so if they want to understand why Malcolm Turnbull, and Karen Phelps kept on saying, well, please explain why Malcolm Turnbull's not Prime Minister. Well, Karen, if you're listening, I can explain. He went after Tony Abbott when Tony Abbott lost 16 news polls. That was the first challenge. Then at 30, he toppled him. Malcolm lost 38. But the rules that applied to Abbott didn't apply to him. Then he went to the 5 by-elections. And he made a statement in Brisbane about the by-elections. This is a test of leadership. It's Shorten versus me. If Shorten can't win these, he's got to go. And, of course, the media kept on saying Albanese will be the new leader. Labor are in trouble. Well, who lost the by-elections? Comprehensively, Malcolm Turnbull. Then, of course, he wanted to outsource our energy policy to the United Nations and is a signatory to the Global Compact on Migration. At a time when immigration and population are two big issues in this country, he was going to say, well, we'll listen to the United Nations telling us what we should do. Don't worry about what the Australian electorate might do. That is why his party got fed up. We owe Peter Dutton a debt. He actually raised the issue. He wasn't the beneficiary at the end. Scott Morrison was. But at the same time, that's one of the virtues, and they can't explain and they stay loyal. And he's calling for loyalty, Laundy. Well, Craig Laundy, can I just say again, when sycophancy clashes with reality, you get irrelevance. And that's precisely what you are. You won't stand for the seat of Reid at the next federal election because you know you can't win it. And you can't confront the fact that you might be a loser. Just on all of this, tonight I thought I'd share with you two stories by way of editorial comment. They're both about character. Much was said about Prince Harry visiting Dubbo at the height of the dreadful drought that's overtaken Queensland, New South Wales and significant parts of Victoria. And he recalled being in Queensland in 2003, jackarooing, on what he called a small 16,000-hectare property near Roma. I must confess I'm not sure what Harry's definition of small is, but we're talking about character. He made some comments which I believe resonated with all Australians when he said, we've learnt about the knock-on effect in drought on the community and families, livestock and crop losses, financial hardship, job losses, intergenerational issues, concerns over the future and the lack of time for rest and relaxation, taking a huge mental and emotional toll on farmers and their families. People in many farming communities generally don't seek the support they need for multiple reasons, because they're often more isolated, their social networks are smaller, and there's still a stigma surrounding mental health. He went on, we know that suicide rates in rural and remote areas are greater than those in urban populations, and this may be especially true among young men in remote regions. And then he said, here's what I also know. You are one huge community, and with that comes an unparalleled level of internal support and understanding. All you need to do is ask for it, and your neighbour, your peer, your fellow farmer is literally right around the corner. Chances are they may well be suffering too, and will relish the opportunity to either listen or talk themselves. And, as I said earlier, he said, you are the toughest people out there, the most persistent, the ones who can weather the storm or the drought. But you need to know that part of being strong and tough is having the courage to ask for help when you need it. You must not silently suffer. You're all in this together, but if I might speak personally, said Prince Harry, we are all in this together, because asking for help is one of the best decisions I ever made. You'll be continually amazed how life changes for the better. You'll be continually amazed how your life changes for the better once you put your hand up. It's not easy, and there are no quick fixes. But then he said, hardship also brings out the best in people, and we've been impressed and inspired by the stories of farming communities and the wider Australian community rallying to support each other through this challenging time. He said, the quality of life and shared values of people here in rural and regional Australia are very special. And then the beautiful personal touch at the end. Megan and I would like to thank you, Dubbo, for inviting us here today and for sharing your stories. Oh, he said, and the rain was a gift. Only a young man of real character could share those observations. I think there's something special in his DNA. Let's turn from Prince Harry to another illustration of character, or a complete lack of it. And of course, I'm referring to the disgraceful behaviour by Malcolm Turnbull in the Wentworth by-election. Thankfully, many of his former colleagues didn't miss. Very sad, though, that a class person like the Liberal candidate Dave Sharma has learnt all too soon about the appalling self-interest of people like Malcolm Turnbull. Mr Sharma was decent enough not to say before the poll that he had rung Mr Turnbull on Thursday evening in a last-ditch appeal to the former Prime Minister to issue an endorsement of him. The request was rejected. Barnaby Joyce weighed in. He accused Malcolm Turnbull of being part of a campaign against the government, and he's right. He said he'd be very surprised if Alex Turnbull had waged the campaign against the government without consulting his father first. As Barnaby Joyce said, that's all he had to say. Please vote for Dave Sharma. I think he could have managed that. Mr Joyce was asked whether Mr Turnbull's silence was a tacit show of support for Alex Turnbull's campaign. Mr Joyce said, "Is there another way to see it?" He said Mr Turnbull's reputation would be shattered because he resigned and refused to endorse the Liberal candidate. Quote, "He was more aware than most of what happens when a government with a one-seat majority has a member retire. He took it upon himself to do exactly that. He did it because he was sulking." Barnaby said, "I could have done the same thing myself, shat on the place and left, but I didn't." Michelle Landry, who's the Assistant Families Minister, holding one of the most marginal seats in the country, said, "I think it's disgraceful. His son's out there saying vote Labor. His father was a goddamn Prime Minister for the Liberal Party. And they're doing this crap," she said. "I'm very annoyed." The Victorian Liberal Party President and our Sky News colleague Michael Kroger said Mr Turnbull should have stayed in Parliament until the next election. But I'm sorry to say, Michael, you and others supported Mr Turnbull's push for the leadership and Prime Ministership over Tony Abbott. I warned it would come to this. As Brad Norrington wrote in yesterday's Australian, Turnbull's abrupt exit is starting to look like the ultimate revenge of an aggrieved former leader. And of course, once in New York, he claimed to be a private citizen but never stopped sniping and destabilising. As Brad Norrington wrote, Turnbull had no intention of helping out. Scott Morrison confirmed that repeated approaches had been made for Mr Turnbull's support. Turnbull turned them all down. Quite a number of us, said Scott Morrison, asked for that support. And of course, Dave Sharma, ever the gentleman, asked on Thursday night and was rejected. What kind of behaviour qualifies for removal from the party? Why aren't Malcolm Turnbull and John Hewson asked to please explain why their membership shouldn't be suspended? Not long after he took off to New York, remember, he made an unsolicited personal intervention over whether Peter Dutton was even eligible to remain in the Parliament. As Barnaby Joyce said, it's been a campaign to, quote, remove us as the government. What is the purpose behind an individual deciding that their goal now in life is to bring down the government, which they weren't just a member of, they actually were the leader? Barnaby Joyce said, people say, what's wrong with Malcolm Turnbull? Well, I think they're starting to find out. Asked if he believed Turnbull was seeking revenge, Barnaby Joyce said, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, you've got a pretty good chance of saying it's a duck. Remember last week a Karen Phelps campaigner tweeted, backhanding out policy info and how to vote cards for Karen Phelps at Waverley Oval pre-polling station, no longer wondering where's Malcolm, just hoping for a strong independent win on Saturday. Malcolm Turnbull tweeted his like of the comment. We're talking character? What kind of character turns his back on the party that gave him everything and doesn't have the grace and decency to lend the most basic level of support to his would-be successor? If the Liberal Party stood for anything, it would ask Malcolm Turnbull, and I might add John Hewson, to show cause why they shouldn't be suspended from the Liberal Party. Prince Harry passed the character test with royal colours. Malcolm Turnbull failed it to the extent that he belongs in Liberal Party oblivion.
And of course, Scott Morrison is now sending him to Indonesia next week to represent Australia on the very, very bloody issue of climate change, where Malcolm believes one thing and most of his party supporters believe something else. I don't understand that.
Well, people are very angry. This happened 8 weeks ago. The argument being that when before all this guerrilla tactic by Turnbull in Wentworth, the argument being that, well, Malcolm Turnbull, and of course Abbott was like this. They were far too generous to these people. I mean, the argument being that he had a good relationship with Widodo. Well, so did Tony Abbott have a good relationship with Widodo. But I mean, this is a bloody, in the strict sense of the word, a bloody issue, this climate change issue.
It is.
And he's on the wrong side of the ledger.
He's on the wrong side of the ledger, the wrong side of his party, the wrong side of history. He's lost his leadership twice over it. There is lack of clarity in the party's current position. Malcolm was the one who blew up his leadership by having that motion put to the party room. But also, let's not forget, he dumped his neg. What policy is he going to advocate for in Indonesia? Can you trust him? Can you trust him to advocate the Australian position? And what is the Australian position? I mean, we go to December in Poland. Is Australia in Paris or out of Paris?
That's correct.
No, it's...
See, and to say it simply again, you can't say it often enough. If the issue is carbon dioxide, which apparently it is, of the whole atmosphere, 0.04% is carbon dioxide. 0.04. And we're supposed to believe, and all these models have been proven by James Cook University to be flawed, but 0.04. Now, of the Earth's total production of carbon dioxide, human beings produce, all human beings, 3%. And of that, I'm talking 0.04 out here, then of the 0.04, human beings produce 3%. And then over here, Australia, of the 3%, produce 1.3%. And we're going to stand Australia's economy on its head. We're going to turn our back on coal-fired power, turn our back on uranium, turn our back on every capacity to make us internationally competitive and energy-rich to accommodate some global warming hoax. And this bloke, who's been on the wrong side of the argument from day one, who lost, as you said, the leadership twice because he was on the wrong side, who wanted to get into bed with Kevin Rudd, is now being sent to Bali to represent Australia at a climate change conference. You'd be sending on someone with you, wouldn't you?
Oh, well, I'd be sending Craig Kelly and leaving Malcolm Turnbull at home. Malcolm Turnbull didn't just cosy up to Kevin Rudd. He crossed the floor and voted with the Labor Party on this issue. Yes, Scott will cop a bit from the usual suspects in the parliament if he stands him down and doesn't send him, but he'll earn, I think, a lot of support and accolade from the party faithful if he pulls this visit from Malcolm Turnbull. Good
on you, Peter. 100% correct. We'll take a break. Fascinating story coming up.
This is Jones & Co. on Sky News Live.